29 days until the midterms, and we are seeing right now a political frenzy by candidates across the nation. The Dems deploying some of their most famous incumbents to stump in battleground states this weekend, urging liberals to turn out for the first national referendum on Trump's presidency since he took office. Republicans, meanwhile, you may have heard, they're saying that the battle and victory in the Kavanaugh fight is stoking their base. Now, as always, in a run-up to an election, there is tons that we don't know. But I'm going to begin tonight with what we do. The available data does not show Republicans are right about that. In fact, the latest polls show Democrats up by an average of 6 points across the generic ballot, up another 8 in one poll taken in the middle of the Kavanaugh fight. It's the kind of lead that could drive a blue wave in typically red states, according to Reuters. Tonight, we can also report that the nonpartisan election forecasters over at the Cook Political Report mark 8 more House races shifting toward Democrats, while, of course, Democrats also have a 4-point edge in another new Washington Post poll. That's of 69 battleground House districts. Now, that is better than expected because most of those seats are in these places held by Republicans. But if you look at that data that would seem positive for the Dems, they're obviously walking a tricky line right now because while indicators for the future can look good, they're addressing party activists who are upset about the present and about Trump's win on the Supreme Court.
This is not a time to curl up. It is not a time to shut up. It is not a time to give up. It's a time to get up, to rise up, to speak up. It's time for you not to wait for hope, but to be the hope.
The bottom line is that they may have the power right now, but we need to take it back. And the only way we are going to do that is when we get everyone out to vote.
And while Republicans are publicly saying they're optimistic about November, new reports from behind the scenes show Trump aides already prepping for Dems to take back the House and then sic Congress's top investigators on Trump world. Let's get right to it. Cornell Belcher, a Democratic strategist who's done polling for the Obama campaign and the DNC, and Jennifer Rubin, a conservative opinion writer for the Washington Post and a critic of much of what Donald Trump has been doing. Cornell, when you look at that back and forth that I just showed, how do Democrats walk that line? The data is good, the mood is sour.
Well, I think a couple of things. All right. One is the battleground poll is important for Dems to have an edge there. But generically in the national generic, and it goes back and forth. But if you look at 2006, the last wave election, Democrats, because of quite frankly, structural problems in districting, Democrats need a 10 or 11 point generic going in. And that's fluctuated back and forth. That said, if the intensity thing is always a plus, but is it intense across the board where with young voters in particular? I'm most worried about millennials not turning out. And if we have a 2014 or 2010 electorate, Democrats won't do well. We need to expand that electorate. And I question whether or not we've done enough to dig into younger voters and make them motivated.
Jennifer?
I think there is a wishful thinking epidemic going on in the Republican Party that Kavanaugh is the solution to all their problems. As you mentioned, the polling data so far doesn't show it. There's another poll from CNN showing that Kavanaugh is very unpopular and he's 20 points down with women. And I think women are the Achilles heel for the Republican Party. You see white women, college-educated women, college-educated whites in general, both men and women, shifting very heavily to the Democratic side. A lot of those suburban districts are the ones that are in swing states. And as far as the Senate goes, people forget a year ago, Democrats were worried about Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin. Those aren't even on the map anymore for Republicans. So Democrats have really narrowed the number of their incumbents that are at risk. And they're still playing very competitively in places like Nevada and Arizona. So it's always been an uphill battle for them to win the Senate. But if I had to choose one party that you'd want to put money on, I would choose the Democrats.
When you mentioned the women, there's always been a gender gap here with 29 days to go. But we'll show you how pronounced that is right now on the screen. When you see 54% among women, that's a 14-point gap. And yet, when you look at the House districts for men, it is exactly reversed, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think the difference is that the men voters, Trump probably has just about all the male white voters he's ever going to get. He actually did well. He keeps telling us he has a wrong statistic, but he actually did well with white women voters. So if those are the people who are now shifting allegiance or are very motivated to turn out for Democrats, as we saw in my home state of Virginia last year, then that's a boost for the Democrats. And I think it's that gap, both on education and on gender, that Democrats are banking on. Interesting point, though, that they have to also have some young voters turn out.
Sure. Cornell, the other side of this is what is completely unknowable, which is how does the Kavanaugh debate, battle, and now confirmation play out? Because there's the substance of it, which is, as Jennifer was just speaking to, may drive even more women turnout, which, as a statistical matter, tends to favor the Dems. But then there's the mood of always losing, even if the experts say, well, yeah, when the Republicans control the Senate, no matter what was going to happen, they were always going to have that edge, right? But the mood of that, I think, is captured here by Saturday Night Live this weekend. I want you to watch this. I want your honest reaction, not just as a Dem, but as a human being, when you look at the way Chuck Schumer is being portrayed and how that echoes across the country. Take a look.
Senator Schumer, what went wrong?
Well, my doctor thinks it might be sciatica.
No, I meant with the Kavanaugh vote.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, the Dems lost another one. You know, that's what we do now.
Cornell, that's a sort of a Chuck Schumer, Montel Jordan, this is how we do it now. Is that a problem for the Dems if that's how they're seen?
Look, I think the truth of the matter is, when women were against this Kavanaugh by better than 20 points, I feel that Kavanaugh is somehow going to be beneficial to you when so many women were against it, I think is fool's gold. That said, what is Schumer to do? And so Schumer's case is going to be, we need, in fact, a Democratic majority in the Senate, because if we, in fact, had a Democratic majority in the Senate, we could have stopped this from going through. So I say it as a rally cry. I think, from a procedural standpoint, Schumer's in a tough place because, in fact, we don't have the majority. We do not have the votes to stop that. We knew that months ago. I give them some credit for putting up the fight that they put, given that we simply do not have the votes to stop Kavanaugh from going in. I think this is a rallying cry. I think this is going to make the 1992, the year of the woman, look pale in comparison to how sort of viscerally upset women are, both Republican and moderate and Democrat women across the board.
And then there's the question of whether Republicans are rethinking anything, even some Republicans somewhere. Stay with me. I want to bring into the conversation Tom Nichols. He's a professor at the U.S. Naval War College. He's a former Republican staffer, and he just wrote in The Atlantic about why this Kavanaugh confirmation fight, among other things, has pushed him to leave the Republican Party. Tom, why right now?
Well, it wasn't just the Kavanaugh confirmation, but I think this was really the last straw, because at this point, I thought there is no future in the Republican Party. There's nowhere to go. There's not going to be a rebuilding when this is over. There's not going to be some kind of moderate center that's going to emerge out of the rubble of the Trump years. And I think when Susan Collins gave up to give her speech, that's when it really struck me that the Republicans who didn't abandon the president after Helsinki and that humiliation in foreign policy, they didn't abandon him after this disastrous nomination process, which the Democrats certainly bore their share of the responsibility for. There simply isn't much of a future after this, and I think for me it was time to go.
You're pessimistic, and you say broader than just Kavanaugh, but kind of a last straw of sorts. Let me read from your piece. You say the Trumpsters and the hucksters and the consultants and the hangers-on are like a colony of bees that exist only to sting and die, and they've swarmed together in a dangerous but suicidal cloud, and when that mindless hive finally extinguishes itself in a blaze of venom, there will be nothing left. I mean, first of all, this raises the question of whether you should be involved in any Harry Potter fan fiction. I don't know what your free time is like. But second of all, do you think it's really that bad? I mean, you think that the way you're writing, it's almost that you're saying the Republican Party, as you know it, will not survive Trumpism.
I said when Trump was nominated that I didn't think the Republican Party could survive Trumpism, but I held out some hope that there would be some way to rebuild it. The problem now is the Republican Party is all about negative goals. It's all about anger and punishment and getting even and trying to, trigger the libs and all of the other things that are all negative goals. This is not the optimistic, can-do, forward-looking Republican Party that I joined as a young man and that existed for the decades after. This is really just a Republican Party that's angry at other people, angry at itself, and I don't think there's going to be much of a future for it after President Trump leaves.
Jennifer?
Well, I have had a little bit of a friendly argument with Tom going on for a number of months, my position being that the Republican Party was not redeemable. So unfortunately, I did win that argument. But welcome to the
Tom, will you say here on national television that Jennifer won?
Jennifer won the argument. Jennifer and I, for well over a year, have been having this discussion about is it salvageable?
I just wanted to confirm that. Jennifer, go on.
Tom is a gentleman, and honest as the day is long. So thank you for that, Tom. But in all seriousness, the things that attracted Tom and I to the Republican Party 20, 30 years ago, free trade, robust immigration, a values-based leadership in the world, respect for facts, a certain dignity, a certain humility, a certain style of governance is completely gone in the Republican Party. In fact, they attack all of those things that I just outlined. So for us to stick around in a party which is not only intellectually bereft, but as Tom says, has kind of become mean-spirited and nasty and cruel, quite frankly, in the way they behave towards victims of sexual assault and sexual abuse, really is not a party I want to have anything to do with. And the question for people like Tom and I is, where do we go? And that's going to be the challenge for us, the challenge for the parties, and maybe for a third-party candidate in 2020.
Right. A lot of big questions here as we look towards what's going to happen in the midterms. Jennifer, Tom, and Cornell, thanks to each of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.